Welcome to biology. In this video, we are going to talk about the ins and outs of what makes up the cell membrane and why it's so unique and special. And you're also going to learn in this unit that cell membrane really determines how that cell is able to function. So the form of the membrane determines how a cell can function. And that's kind of our theme throughout this unit. So the cell membrane is made of what's called a fluid mosaic model, and we have lipids and proteins that are working together to make this membrane. Now, lipids and proteins are both some of those macromolecules that we talked about in our last unit. So the lipid bilayer is a term that we use to describe the structure of the cell membrane, and it's made up of two layers of phospholipids. Now, phospholipids are a special type of lipid, and they are what's called amphipathic, which means they have a hydrophobic end and a hydrophilic end. So if we look at this image, we can see the individual phospholipid, which is the blue circle with two tails coming off the end. And we have two layers of them, but they're arranged so that way the water-hating tails are close to each other and the water-loving heads are pointing towards the either inside of the cell or outside of the cell. And that's because the intracellular and the extracellular solutions are aqueous or water-based. So since the heads are hydrophilic or water-loving, they are on the outside attracted towards that water, but the tails do not like water at all, and those are kind of forming the membrane by flipping towards the inside. Now this makes sense because water is polar, and polar substances don't mind being around other polar substances. And non-polar substances do everything they can to get away from those polar substances. And this arrangement is actually what allows the cell membrane to be selectively permeable. And more on that in just a moment. So again, the fluid mosaic is of lipids and proteins. So let's talk about the proteins here real quick. So the proteins fall into two categories. We have peripheral proteins, which are bound to the surface. Think about your peripheral vision is the very edge at which you can no longer see anything. So the edge of your vision is your peripheral vision. Peripheral proteins are bound right to the edge or just to the surface of the cell membrane. Integral proteins are integrated or go all the way through the cell membrane. And peripheral and integral proteins do some totally different jobs. So some functions of the proteins could be to transport things in and out of the cell. They could be enzymes that help to speed up certain reactions by reducing that activation energy. They could even help cells recognize each other to know, is this a safe substance that is near me? They help with signal transduction and with intracellular joining. Now, the cell membrane is selectively permeable based off of this structure. And selectively permeable means that not everything can go through the cell membrane. And that's really important because your cell membrane doesn't want to just let anything in. There might be something that's harmful trying to get into the cell, and your cell wants to protect itself from any harm. But at the same time, there's stuff that's inside of the cell that the cell doesn't want to just let go out and go everywhere because it kind of needs all of its stuff. So the hydrophobic membrane interior, that's where those tails are within that cell membrane, those are only going to allow small non-polar substances to just float right through. And the transport proteins, which are those big integral proteins, they're specific. They only allow one specific type of thing to go through each specific channel. So if a cell doesn't have a channel for something, it's not able to allow that substance to move in or out of the cell. So what does this mean? Well, it means that the cell membrane with these two pieces together really controls what can come in and out of the cell, and it does that through what's called active transport and passive transport. And we'll have whole videos that are talking about just those two topics. So the types of substances that can easily pass through that cell membrane would be very small and non-polar because they'd be able to slip between the individual phospholipids, and they'd have to be able to survive in that non polar environment in the middle where all the tails are. These would be things like oxygen gas and carbon dioxide. So they're very small and they are nonpolar. Substances that are not able to go through there would be anything that's polar or way too big to just fit between the phospholipids. These would be things like water, which is slightly polar, any type of ion that has either a positive or a negative charge, or something that's really big, such as glucose. Now together, all of these pieces make up the cell membrane, and you need to understand why it is so incredibly fascinating.